Have you ever wondered what happened to NASA's original group of astronauts, the Mercury 7? Stick around, because on this episode of Revealing History, we're going to find out. Hey guys, Dennis Gill here, and welcome to the channel. I'm so happy that you're here. So how cool would it have been to be one of the first men chosen to go into space? And trust me when I tell you, if you were a fighter pilot, your job was already pretty damn cool. So becoming an astronaut was just next level stuff. Not only are you about to take the ultimate ride on top of a rocket into space, but you're going from being virtually unknown to one of the most famous people on Earth. Instant celebrity status. The 7 men signed deals with Life magazine, who gave them $500,000 to split between them. That's the equivalent of $4.5 million today. General Motors gave them each a free Corvette. They got book deals out of it, military promotions, special housing allowance to purchase a home. The list is endless. Every man wanted to be them, and every woman wanted to be with them.
Hey, how you doing?
So what ended up happening to the Mercury 7? I mean, that's why you're here, right? So let's get into it. Of the 7 men chosen, 1 had to be first into space.
Oh, he's the Captain Obvious guy.
And that honor went to naval officer Alan Shepard, who on May 5th, 1961, blasted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida in his Freedom 7 capsule aboard a Mercury Redstone rocket. His flight lasted just 15 minutes and 22 seconds and achieved an altitude of 116.5 miles. His ride into space and back was short and sweet, but was a groundbreaking moment for the U.S. space program. Although he was living the dream, not all things came up roses for Alan Shepard. In 1963, he was grounded due to an inner ear disease. As a consolation, he was named Chief of the Astronaut Office, a role he served in until 1969. And it was then that his fortunes would change. He was reinstated to flight status, and in 1971, Alan Shepard would command the Apollo 14 mission and become the 5th and oldest person at the age of 47 to walk on the moon and become the first to play golf on its surface. And once he got back to Earth, he resumed his duties as chief astronaut until he retired in 1974 from both NASA and the Navy at the rank of admiral. He was the first astronaut to reach that rank. In retirement, Alan Shepard became a successful businessman, entrepreneur, and founder of the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. He sadly passed away in 1998 at the age of 74 from cancer. Aboard Liberty Bell 7, Virgil Gus Grissom became the 2nd American in space, and like Shepard, he only made a suborbital flight. The mission was fairly routine and uneventful, that is until splashdown. And shortly after landing in the Atlantic Ocean, the spacecraft's emergency explosive bolts unexpectedly fired, blowing off the hatch and causing water to flood into the capsule. Grissom fortunately got out safely and was rescued. The spacecraft, however, well, it wasn't so lucky. It took on so much water that it couldn't be saved, and eventually it sunk into the ocean. On March 23, 1965, Grissom returned to space as the commander of Gemini 3, making him the first American to fly into space twice. And tragically, on January 27, 1967, Grissom, along with Ed White and Roger Chaffee, were killed during the pre-launch tests for the Apollo 1 mission. The incident led to major design and safety changes in the Apollo program, ultimately contributing to its success.
To success.
Success.
Of all the Mercury astronauts, John Glenn is probably the most famous, although he might have also been the most boring. His flight into space is significant because he became the first American to orbit the Earth aboard Friendship 7. And Glenn launched on February 20th, 1962, and orbited the Earth 3 times. I guess that was enough, because in 1964, he resigned from NASA and retired from the Marine Corps at the rank of colonel just a few months later.
I'm out of here.
And almost immediately, he got into politics, and in 1974, he was elected to the United States Senate, where he would serve until 1999. He tried, but was unsuccessful at becoming a Democratic presidential nominee in 1984. And that's probably a good thing, because we all know what happened to Democrats in that election.
It was a real bad night.
But Mercury was not the end of Glenn's astronaut career, because in 1998, Glenn became the oldest person to fly in space when he lifted off aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery during STS-95. He was the last surviving member of the Mercury 7 when he passed away at the age of 95 in 2016. Scott Carpenter flew into space aboard Aurora 7 on May 24, 1962. Half the mission went as planned. The second half, well, let's just say Carpenter had ruffled a few feathers.
Pissed off too many people.
According to Chris Kraft, who was the flight director for the mission, Carpenter completely ignored the request of Mission Control to check his instrument. And during re-entry, there was a malfunction of one of the spacecraft systems, which caused Carpenter to have to take manual control of the ship. And as a result, he missed the splashdown point by 250 miles. And although it was the malfunction that resulted in the error, Carpenter's defiance while in space put him on Kraft's shit list. He would never fly again in space. But that wasn't the last for Scott Carpenter the Explorer. After meeting famed oceanographer Jacques Cousteau in 1963, Carpenter took a leave of absence from NASA to join the Navy's Sea Lab project. And in 1965, he spent 30 days living and working on the ocean floor aboard Sea Lab 2. He would eventually return to NASA, but never flew again, either because he had pissed off Chris Kraft or because of an injury he suffered to his arm during a motorcycle accident. Probably the combination of the two. He would leave NASA in 1967 for good and continued his work in oceanography, participating in various underwater research projects and working with the Navy's Deep Sea Submergent Systems project. He was the author of 2 techno-thrillers and his autobiography, a consultant for the film industry, and appeared in several television commercials. He died in 2013 at the age of 88 after suffering a stroke. October 3rd, 1962 was the launch of Sigma 7 and the 5th American in space, Wally Schirra. The mission lasted 6 orbits and primarily served to demonstrate Schirra's precise manual control of the spacecraft, which was crucial for future missions. He performed several maneuvers to test the spacecraft's stability and control system, and by all accounts, the mission was a huge success. Schirra was given command of Gemini 6, which launched on December 15, 1965, and successfully rendezvoused with Gemini 7, which had been launched almost 2 weeks prior. And the 2 spacecraft maneuvered within only a foot of each other, making the United States the first country to achieve this milestone in space.
Everything and everyone can suck it.
On October 11, 1968, Schirra commanded Apollo 7, the first of the Apollo program, to launch into space with a crew. And Schirra would become the first person to fly into space 3 times, and it would be his last. He retired from NASA and the Navy with the rank of captain in 1969. Wally Schirra became a commentator for CBS television, providing expert analysis and commentary for space missions that included the Apollo moon landings. He would enter the private sector, leveraging his fame and expertise, and became involved in various business ventures and served on the board of several companies. He wrote his autobiography and became NASA's Ambassador of Exploration in 2005. Wally Schirra passed away on May 3, 2007, at the age of 84 after suffering a heart attack. The last of the Mercury mission flights took place on May 15, 1963, when Gordon Cooper flew aboard Faith 7. At 22 orbits, it was the longest of the Mercury flights and made Gordo the first American to spend an entire day in space. And not only was he the last of the original astronauts to fly in space, he was the last American to fly solo into space. The flight was successful, but wasn't without its problems. Technical issues toward the end of the flight caused Cooper to have to take manual control during re-entry. He was forced to use his understanding of star patterns and his wristwatch for timing. He splashed down only 4 miles from the recovery ship. That's pretty badass if you ask me. Cooper went on to command the Gemini 5 mission, where he and astronaut Pete Conrad set new space endurance records by spending nearly 8 days in space, demonstrating that astronauts could survive long enough to travel to the moon and back. As with many test pilots turned astronauts at the time, Gordon Cooper was a little bit of a maverick. He was in line for command of Apollo 13, but was ultimately replaced by Alan Shepard because NASA was concerned about his attitude toward training. He retired from NASA and the Air Force on July 31st, 1970. He would return to space, however. More on that in a minute. Cooper pursued various business interests, including designing, racing, and building championship boats, consulting for car companies on design and construction. He would go on to work on fiberglass structures and aeronautical lifting bodies, and served as vice president for research and development at Epcot for the Walt Disney Company. Gordon Cooper passed away on October 4th, 2004 of a heart attack. Some of his cremated remains were launched into orbit aboard a private spaceship in 2012. Deke Slayton was the only Mercury astronaut not to fly into space during the project. He was grounded in 1962 due to a heart condition. But that wasn't the end of his NASA career, not by a long shot. After his grounding, he became coordinator of astronaut activities and later director of flight crew operations. He was responsible for making astronaut flight assignments for the Gemini and Apollo missions, earning him the nickname Chief Astronaut. He was the guy who decided if and when you flew into space. He was also the guy that you didn't want to piss off. After years of treatment, Slayton was returned to flight status in 1972 and finally flew into space in 1975 as part of the Apollo-Soyuz test project, the first joint US-Soviet space mission. He continued to work for NASA until 1982, and along the way, helped develop the space shuttle. After retiring from NASA, Slayton worked in private space enterprises, including Space Services, Inc., which developed rockets for small commercial payloads. Sadly, he passed away on June 13, 1993, at the age of 69 after a short battle with cancer. He is literally the poster child for not giving up on your dream. All 7 Mercury astronauts were extraordinary men, and although he never flew into space, Air Force fighter pilot Robin Olds was no different. He was a World War II double ace and was instrumental in the planning and execution of Operation Bolo during the Vietnam War. It succeeded in shooting down nearly half of North Vietnam's MiG-21s in only 12 minutes. Now that's gangster. To hear the amazing story of that operation, click the screen now. And until we meet again, I'm Dennis Gill for Revealing History.